Alrighty, everybody. Let's take a look at something new today. So we are going to talk about a new opening called the Slav Defense. Now, the Slav Defense is named after the grandmasters that came out of the Slavic region, but it also became popularized by Alekhine. So our guy Alekhine is back at it again, looking for ways to counterattack with black, and he popularized it in the 1937 World Championships. It is a move order in response to the Queen's Gambit line. So we started to see this while we were playing the Queen's Gambit lines. Essentially, what happens is we push a Queen's pawn, and then our opponent responds with d5, and then we push c4. A Queen's Gambit declined line would be our opponent pushing e6. But the Slav is instead you push c6. Now, why is this important? Well, if you go for the Queen's Gambit declined, one of the things you end up doing is you kind of lock out your light square bishop. So is there an improvement where we can not lock out our light square bishop, especially considering the queen side from white's perspective, their light square, right, this diagonal has been weakened, right? Both of these diagonals are going to end up being a little bit weakened, but specifically the light square diagonal right in front of the queen side is weakened. So getting our light square bishop involved in the game could be a powerful thing. So let us, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Delete. So instead, the Slavic version plays c6, which does open up the light square bishop. Now, not all lines get to use that, but it is something that black is looking for in this case. Briefly, we're going to talk about one of the lines. It's called the exchange variation. I don't play the exchange variation. It's not a very popular variation, but if you are the white pieces and you want to try it, go for it. Essentially, it works like this. White captures. We make the exchange. From black's perspective, if you see the exchange variation, that's fine. Just go ahead and capture back. From here, you're going to do standard development. It's just like the king's pawn openings where we saw, because you're going to see basically a knight attacking and a knight defending. And so this looks almost like an Italian game or a Roy Lopez opening, except from in front of the queen instead of in front of the king. So it's kind of like flipped. This is the exchange variation. From here, you just continue developing like normal. I don't play it, so I can't give you a lot of advice on it. Exchange variation. Let's back up here. So c6. From here, you're going to see, most of the time, you're going to see the main line. The main line is essentially just develop. In the Queen's Gambit lines, when white's playing the Queen's Gambit, if you see someone playing the Slav, all you really need to do is continue to development like normal. Your two knights are going to end up on c3 and f3. And eventually you're going to see black's knight get developed as well. So the main line would look like this. From here, you see the other knight come into play. Now, in the Queen's Gambit declined lines, one of the tricks that black has up its sleeve is it holds off on making this capture, right? We hold off until white makes a tempo move, then we capture, then white makes another tempo move. So we force white to spend an extra tempo when we capture. In the Slav, that's not necessary. You can go ahead and capture. As soon as you see this knight, as soon as you see this knight move up, and your nice reminder is the knight is sitting here under the pawn, so we capture the pawn. So we can go ahead and make this trade early, because here's one of the traps that white can fall into, that the Slav has. If white tries to capture back their pawn early, black can push an early b5. And now this is important. This is a difference from like the Queen's Gambit accepted lines, where you accept the gambit and then you try and you push your b5 to try to hold this. Well, white can infiltrate with the queen. We don't have to worry about that because we've already pushed c6 and it is defended by our knight. So this queen, even if this knight weren't here, this queen is not going to get the infiltration that it was hoping for. So you don't have to worry about it. So in the Slav, you can capture early and you can then defend with b5. If your opponent wastes time by trying to capture back their pawn early. If they waste that tempo, this gives you an opportunity to kind of put him in a little bit of a trap. Typically, what white will try to do to respond is undermine, just like they do in the Queen's Gambit accepted variation. They're going to undermine the structure. Black ignores it and pushes past and puts pressure on this knight. And this is one of the powers of the Slav. Even if you don't get to take advantage of this light square bishop, this light square diagonal, we'll see in some cases what happens is we do end up blocking our light square bishop in. That's okay, because we're going to do something more powerful. We're basically going to eliminate this knight for free. So this knight is now in jeopardy. Where can this knight go? Can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. It could go home, right? This knight could go home. So you waste an entire tempo sending the knight right back home. Or you can go to A2 or E2. If your opponent plays... If white, like if I'm playing this and I get into this position, I'm going to be looking for E2. If only because it feels better. This feels more natural to rotate my knight, then eventually rotate my knight up here to G3. The knight on G3, once we castle, the king is going to be sitting here on G1. The knight will do a great job of defending our back rank issues. Sitting right here, it's defending a couple squares. Our other knight is defending a couple squares. So we have control in front of our king. Is that stronger or weaker? I don't know, but that feels more natural. Now, from this point of view, essentially all black has to do is push their own A pawn. And what black is saying is, I am starting my queenside attack even before the game has begun, right? So we really haven't done a whole lot of developing. Both players have a ton of developing left to do. Even this knight needs to rotate so that the bishop can develop. But look at the expansion on the queen side. So this is one of the powers of the Slav, is it allows black to make that expansion. And if this is the kind of game that you like to play, kind of an aggressive counterattack, if you will. It's not really a counterattack because white never really attacked to begin with. But but this kind of aggressive move from black, if you like that, then the Slav will give that to you. Now you could see something like this, and then maybe now you really can't get. See, now you can't get the light square bishop out. So this is one of the lines where you end up closing your light square bishop in. You have to find a different route to get it out and involved. This knight is most likely going to rotate around. Whenever you see your pawns kind of sitting in this pattern where they're back here on C6 and E6, your knight's probably going to rotate through in between them, right, like behind, because the knight can't develop naturally, so developing through here seems like a natural fit. But yeah, so we have closed off our light square bishop, so okay, so we are missing out on that, but we are defending here, actually multiply defending, so even if you try to get a bishop up to attack it, not going to do any good. And we have expanded so much already. That's something to think about, all right? So this is one variation of the Slav. Appropriately, it's also called the Ayekin variation. And we back up, you can see that as soon as you see your opponent try to capture back their pawn, go ahead and make your counterattack. All right? The other thing that could happen, right? So white pushes A4, black ignores it and pushes past. Instead of the knight going to E2, the knight could go to A2. One of the other things that we saw in the previous variation where the knight went to E2 was black had expanded tremendously on the queen side, and all of white's focus had shifted to the king side. All the pieces and everything were over on the king side of the board. So one reason why you might put your knight to A2 is to leave at least one piece on the queen side of the board, right? It also gives you the hope of capturing this pawn back. So white is saying, all right, fine, I'm going to get one of these pawns back. This is another one where you could see, right, you could see an early E6, which does, yes, it blocks in our light square bishop, but it defends this pawn. So white says, all right, well, I'll capture back this way. So white now has equalized the material. They've gotten their pawn back. But this knight is out of the game. White is now going to spend time, energy, brain power, tempo trying to get this knight back into the game. This pawn is going to do a fantastic job locking it out. This bishop can rotate up one of these squares up here, get involved in the game, take advantage, but also defend here. We could bring this pawn down to defend here if we needed to. This pawn, maybe not so much because it could easily be captured. So maybe not so much this pawn, but our A pawn and our dark square bishop are going to keep a close eye on our B pawn, and our B pawn is locking out this knight. The knight doesn't have a whole lot of places it can go to, right? So can't go here, can't go here. This is in the way. So we have to wait for the dark square bishop to get developed. Let's say something like bishop e7, and then maybe the dark square bishop gets involved this way. So now I can start rotating my knight around. Now I can rotate my knight up to e2 to get it back into the game. Maybe I can rotate it up here back to b3 to get it back into the game. So white is spending time and tempo trying to get this knight back into the game, and all we've done is pushed a pawn. So it balances out a little bit. Both players are ready to castle, so there is that, and you will have both players will look for ways to equalize the board position. But it does give black an opportunity to force things onto black's terms. Does that make sense? So that's what happens if white tries to... So if white pushes the knight, we just capture, right? So the knight is here under this pawn, so we just capture. If white tries to capture this pawn early, we attack. All right? But what if white doesn't? And the correct move for white is not, let me delete this. The correct move for white is not to try to push and capture our pawn early. White's next move is to stop b5. So what white wants to do is do an early a4 push. Yes, it feels a little unnatural, just throwing this pawn down the board, but it stops b5, which stops this whole shenanigan of locking our knight out of the game. So by stopping b5, the game continues. And so this would be the main line that both players need to be thinking about. So if you're playing from the white side and your opponent captures here, early a4, right? Because we do not want to see the 3 pawns like this, and we don't want to see b4. So early a4 stops that. Now from here, what black can do instead is now we can move our bishop to b5, or f5, excuse me. So bishop to f5 now gives white this nice strong diagonal. And we do not have to move this bishop. All right, so maybe white would try to push an early e4 to lock us out, but we have 2 attackers in that square. White only has 1, so if you were to push e4, captures, 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 I'm up a pawn. So maybe not something you want to do. So white is saying, I'm not going to be able to get in that e4 square like I want to. Black is saying, not only do I have the e4 square covered, but I also have this nice strong diagonal in my bishop. The only way really to dislodge this bishop would be to push my kingside pawns. And white is not going to want to push their kingside pawns, usually. All right, so there's always people who want to play those games, and I'm sure smarter people will find ways to push, a g4 and push the kingside pawns. But typically, especially at our rating level, typically people are not going to want to mess up their kingside pawns just after they've messed up all their queenside. Notice all the weaknesses, right? We've got all these weaknesses on the queen side. We really don't want to start adding more weaknesses on the king side, do we? Actually, that doesn't even work because we can still capture here, so that doesn't work anyway. Let me undo this. So you'd have to do something like this, and then something like this, and completely mess up your kingside structure. So once this bishop lands on f5 from this structure, it's a very strong one. Now, white can say, all right, what if I were to challenge it this way? All right, let's say we continue developing and all that kind of stuff. What if I were to challenge it this way? All right, I'll just defend it with with my e6 pawn. So now, yes, okay, I'm going to lose my strong light square bishop. But once I castle, my rook is going to sit on this semi-open file. White's going to get their pawn back. Let's say we bring our bishop out to something like that. Maybe we pin, right? Maybe we put a pin on this knight, something like that. Get our pawn back, then castle, castle. Now we can take control of this long. So yes, we're giving up our strong light square bishop, but we are gaining other advantages. Meaning we are gaining control of this semi-open file. We've got control of the b4 square. And notice this b4 square can be defended by our a4 pawn, or a5 pawn. And there are no pawns on either side of this bishop, so this bishop is in a nice outpost and is not going anywhere. We could even throw a pawn down the board, possibly sacrifice it. All right, your opponent would have to either push past, like if I push down with this pawn, this square is covered once. I mean, it is attacked once, but defended twice. So we could even open it up that way, gaining a pawn. Or if our opponent captures and we sacrifice, now we've got a fully open e-file for our rook. So there are some strategies built into the Slav which are different than the strategies we see in the Queen's Gambit lines, or the Queen's Gambit Declined, or even some of the other lines we see. There are some interesting strategies and a few tricks and traps and things to watch out for, but it's a fascinating series of opening. It's a fascinating opening that I want to explore more. I want to try to play it a little bit more. So let me delete all this. We don't need any of it. Delete all that. So we see a d4, d5, c4, c6. Then we're going to go into a mainline Slav. We see the knight. We capture. White does not capture back. We are going to push an early a4. And then from there, okay, now it's safe that our bishop can come to f5. From here, now white is going to go ahead and capture back our pawn. And then there's also a sideline of this knight to e5. I have not studied this line. It is an aggressive line from white, putting pressure immediately on this f7 pawn. But it also gives white a semi-strong outpost, because now this pawn, the knight has to move for this pawn to attack it. It's just one move to get that pawn involved, but this is a fairly strong outpost, semi-outpost, is that a thing? For this knight. I have not studied this, the Kraus attack. I don't know this opening, but it is something that if you guys want to explore it, if you're looking for something more aggressive, throw your knight up to e5, right? It's defended. Go for it, see what happens. I encourage you to try these things. These are some cool openings. But we'll continue with the main line of e3. And then from there, black is going to go ahead. Now that the light square bishop is outside the chain, we're going to go ahead and open up. Now we've got our dark square bishop, so black has both bishops powered up. Now we can capture. Now we can get our bishop in, pinning here. So now we're going to see white castle. Now we'll see black castle. So now you can, from here, you can have a standard game. Most likely you'll see something like this coming from here as well. I don't know what the next best move would be. Something like this, maybe? All right, let's look at the database. Queen e2 or queen e3. Okay. Yeah, and then this is always a possibility to dislodge this really strong bishop, but you can just slide your rook over. Captures, and then we have already taken control. It's even more fun if the queen is there, but that's neither here nor there, is it? Yeah, and then eventually, like I said, we can push this pawn to give this bishop a nice strong outpost. So this is an interesting opening. So this is one of the main, this that we just looked at right now was variations of the main line, or the modern Slav. There is, if we back up a little bit, so once we move our knight and black captures, there is the Slav Gambit. I don't play the Slav Gambit. I don't know the Slav Gambit, but It's this, the Geller Gambit. But this gambit line, what this is saying is, right, so we're gambiting this pawn. That's not really a gambit. But it's a variation, and the idea is that white is now saying, I'm controlling the center. I'm going to eventually get this pawn back. This is probably coming, right? So black is going to try to challenge it from this side of the board. But what happens if if this pawn comes, what happens if I push? Well, now your knight is on the defensive and having to get out there, and then I can just make a trade here, and now my knight has done work and is not stuck, right, back here on A2 or something like that, or it's not spending 16 turns rotating up and around. Black would again say that we were expanding on the queen side. It's an interesting gambit. I don't know it. I don't play it. Maybe one day we'll take a look at it. But the idea here is instead of an early A4, you can push an early E4. That's the main branching point. So we know that from the white side of the board, when black captures, we're not going to try to defend just yet. Normally we'd play A4. But you could play an E4 and go for that Geller Gambit. Again, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying I don't play that one. I don't know it well enough. So I'm avoiding it. I have played games that have gone this way. And then from here, well, we'll look at one of the games I played here in a little bit. But this is the Slav, okay? So the Slav is one of the main goals of the Slav is to try to take advantage of the weaknesses that white is voluntarily giving up. So white is voluntarily pushing these pawns and voluntarily weakening this light square on the queen side. So black is looking to take advantage of that. And also black is looking to possibly get both of their bishops out, right? So if black can get both bishops activated and into the game, that's a win. One of the tricks is black could trap this knight into a situation where this knight is kind of locked out of the game or really annoying for white. It's one of the tricks. But mostly it is just a developing sequence in which black uses the power of his queenside pawns to put pressure on white and force white to give up some of the control of the center, or force white to shift away from the center towards just the king side, splitting their resources to try to maybe save this knight, or focusing on this light square bishop, which is a really strong light square bishop. It forces white into some of these kind of reactionary type measures. White likes it because we've opened up the center, we're going to get castled, and white can now take advantage of central pawns, right? So if white can sit pawns on both D and E4, yes, we know this light square is coming, but if we can get situated here, we could take out the possibility of that light square bishop, right? So this Geller Gambit could be kind of a fun one because it prevents the light square bishop from getting involved in the game and encourages it getting locked out, right? So if we saw some kind of trade like this, that wouldn't happen. Nobody would give up a knight for that pawn. Yeah, I guess that gives up control. I don't know. I like I said, I don't play the Geller Gambit, so I don't know. But white is saying, if I can get control back of the center and the king side, then you go play on the queen side away from the cool stuff, and we're going to control the center and the king side. So that's what white's looking to do with the Slav. White is saying, that's fine. Go ahead and bring your queen side pawns in. I'm going to ignore them, and I'm going to shift and put the pressure on the real side of the board where the kings are, and the kings are the only thing that matter. So both sides find the opening to be an interesting opening, and I'm looking forward to playing it more. Ignore all this junk because I don't know the Geller Gambit. I don't want to pretend that I know the Geller Gambit. There's the b5 that we talked about, and then the e5 that we talked about. So it proceeds like that, okay. And then white just says, I'm not going to Maybe rotate right, white. Maybe rotate the knight around this way. Interesting. What an interesting development. Okay, so I'm just clicking through the database because I don't know this opening. So anyway, we don't even need to worry about it. But the point I'm trying to make is go play the Slav. Try it out yourself. See if you like it. I'll try to get a video up here real soon on a recent game I just played that made me think to make this video because I just played a Slav game and it was an interesting game. It developed kind of in a fun way, and so it made me think that, you know, it's time to get this video going. So I'm going to try to go out there and I'm going to try to catch some games in the Slav system and see how they go. All right? Take care, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.